For 3 decades, Johnny Carson ruled late-night television. His charm and wit made America laugh every night, but when the cameras stopped, his private words revealed something darker. Friends say he kept a mental list of the people he despised most, Hollywood legends who wore masks of glamour but hid cruelty underneath. In his final years, Carson no longer softened his judgment. He began telling stories that shattered the carefully polished images of stars the world thought it knew. Joan Crawford, the Queen with ice in her veins. In 1970, Joan Crawford appeared on The Tonight Show, dazzling the audience with her immaculate posture, glittering jewelry, and rehearsed grace. To the millions watching at home, she was still the queen of Hollywood glamour. But to Carson and his crew, the experience was unforgettable for entirely different reasons. Before she even set foot in the studio, she sent over a 4-page memo demanding precise lighting angles, chair heights, and even the exact temperature. 67 degrees, not a degree higher or lower. Carson's staff tolerated these demands, but the true cruelty appeared when Crawford interacted with those she deemed beneath her. One young assistant, only 20 years old, accidentally walked into her dressing room with water she had requested. Instead of a thank you, Crawford unleashed a tirade so vicious that people in the hallway froze in shock. She called the girl brainless and suggested she belonged in a brothel. The assistant fled in tears, and Crawford demanded she be fired. The producer refused, and the tension lingered for the rest of the taping. Carson did what he always did, kept smiling for the camera, even as he struggled to connect with a woman he privately described as a beautiful statue with nothing inside. During commercial breaks, Crawford sat stone-faced, silent, only to instantly reanimate when the red light came back on. Years later, when Christina Crawford's Mommy Dearest exposed Joan's alleged abuse of her adopted children, Carson wasn't surprised. He quietly told friends, "I believe every word." To him, Crawford was proof that Hollywood's brightest stars could be demons once the lights went out. Frank Sinatra, the charming bully, Carson couldn't stand. On stage, Johnny Carson and Frank Sinatra looked like old friends. Sinatra would crack jokes, tell stories, maybe even sing a few lines, while Carson played the respectful host. But off camera, Carson's feelings toward Old Blue Eyes were far more complicated. He respected Sinatra's extraordinary talent, but he also saw behavior that left him deeply unsettled. Sinatra lived his life by his own rules. Directors, hotel managers, record executives, everyone bent to his will. Carson discovered that Sinatra expected the same treatment on The Tonight Show. He often arrived with an entourage of tough-looking men who spread through the studio like security guards, watching staff with cold eyes. Crew members described the atmosphere as suffocating, as though they were being monitored by mob enforcers instead of stagehands. The most infamous incident happened in the early 1970s when a floor manager gave Sinatra the standard 3-minute warning before his segment. Instead of a nod, Sinatra grabbed the man by his tie, pulled him close, and hissed, "Nobody tells me when I go on. I'll walk out when I'm ready." The floor manager, a veteran of the Korean War, was visibly shaken. Carson watched the confrontation on a monitor in his office and nearly canceled the segment. He went through with it only after producers reminded him of the ratings boost Sinatra always delivered. Carson kept smiling when the cameras rolled, but he never forgot how Sinatra treated people behind the scenes. He once told a close friend, "If he didn't sing, he'd be a mob enforcer, and sometimes I think he was both." The disrespect wasn't limited to staff. During one appearance, Sinatra made a cruel remark about a female employee's looks, loud enough for others to hear. For the first time, Carson broke his usual composure, telling him coldly, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." Though Carson rarely interfered with booking decisions, he privately insisted Sinatra be limited to one appearance a year. For a man who almost never banned anyone, that decision spoke volumes. He admired the music, but he despised the bullying arrogance. To Carson, Sinatra was a reminder that fame could make even the most gifted performers dangerous when they believed no one could ever say no. Orson Welles, the genius who thought he owned the show. When Orson Welles appeared on The Tonight Show, the audience at home saw a larger-than-life genius. His booming voice, his dramatic stories, his presence that filled the room, he was unforgettable. But for Carson and his staff, Welles was one of the most exhausting guests to handle. Behind the brilliance was an ego so overwhelming that he acted as if normal rules didn't apply to him. Welles made his disdain clear before he even sat down. Writers prepared thoughtful questions, only to watch him cross them all out and dismiss their work as pedestrian. He gave Carson nothing to work with, forcing the host to improvise in front of millions. Even worse, Welles ignored the timing that held the show together. On one occasion in the mid-1970s, he was scheduled for a 7-minute segment. Instead, he launched into a 25-minute monologue, brushing off every subtle cue Carson sent. 2 other guests were bumped completely from the show that night. Carson, known for his ability to guide a conversation smoothly, was left helpless. At one point, Welles even told a cameraman how to adjust the angle, directing the show as if he were still in charge of a film set. "Never again," Carson muttered afterward. "That guy thinks he's still running Rome." The arrogance extended beyond the stage. Welles treated production assistants like servants, referring to them in the third person as if they weren't even in the room. "Tell the girl I need water," he would say, refusing to look them in the eye. His personal life mirrored this disregard. His marriages crumbled under affairs and betrayals, and his children often spoke of being neglected or abandoned. Welles used them for photographs when he needed to look like a devoted father, then returned to his lovers and his work. Carson admired true talent, but he couldn't abide cruelty or contempt. With Welles, he saw a man who believed his genius excused everything. "Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show," Carson told Ed McMahon after one particularly draining taping. For Carson, Welles represented the danger of unchecked ego, when the art became a shield for arrogance and respect for others disappeared completely. Bette Davis, Hollywood's queen of verbal violence. Few stars could command an audience like Bette Davis. Her sharp eyes, her razor wit, her legendary performances had made her an icon of the golden age. On The Tonight Show, she carried that same energy, dazzling viewers with biting humor and remarkable stories. But behind the curtain, Carson knew another side of her, one so abrasive that even he, the unflappable host, struggled to endure it. Davis had a habit of treating interviews as battlegrounds. If another guest was present, she would talk over them, dismiss them, or turn her back completely if she felt upstaged. One talent coordinator remembered how Davis seethed whenever a younger performer earned a laugh. She would wait, then cut in with her own story, desperate to regain control of the spotlight. Backstage, the behavior grew harsher. Davis demanded whiskey before her appearances, and when she drank too much, her comments often shocked even by the standards of the 1970s. Staff recalled her using language that was sexist, racist, and cruel. One makeup artist remembered being rejected with the words, "Get me someone whose hands don't shake like they've come off a 3-day drunk." Another crew member recalled being berated for holding cue cards a fraction off center, humiliated in front of the entire team. Carson usually avoided confrontation, but one night he stepped in. Davis was tearing into a young cue card operator when Johnny quietly told her, "On this show, we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." She was startled, unaccustomed to being challenged, but she backed down. Even so, Carson left the set shaken, later joking to Ed McMahon, "No one should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without a lawyer present." What made Davis so difficult for Carson was not just her behavior, but the contradiction it exposed. He admired her immense talent, her iconic career, But he could not ignore the cruelty she directed at those with no power to fight back. After her final Tonight Show appearance in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly said, "That's the last time. Life's too short to be verbally flogged by Bette Davis, no matter how many Oscars she has." Mickey Rooney, the fallen child star with wandering hands. Mickey Rooney was once Hollywood's golden boy. From 1939 to 1941, he was the #1 box office star in America, remembered for his Andy Hardy films and boyish charm. To millions, he was a living link to the golden age. But when Rooney appeared on The Tonight Show in the 1970s, Carson saw not a nostalgic icon, but a troubling figure whose behavior had grown disturbing. Rooney often arrived in poor condition. Crew members whispered that he had been drinking before tapings, and his slurred speech and chaotic stories gave the impression of a man unraveling. Instead of charming anecdotes, he rambled through crude tales and inappropriate jokes, leaving Carson scrambling to salvage the show. In one infamous appearance, he began sharing a story about Judy Garland that turned so uncomfortable, Carson was forced to cut him off mid-sentence and pivot to another topic. What unsettled Carson more than the rambling, though, was Rooney's behavior toward women. Female staff dreaded being assigned to his dressing room. Several assistants recalled how Rooney would grab their hands, pull them close, or whisper suggestive comments. If they tried to pull away, he held on just a little too long. Some even asked to be reassigned whenever his name appeared on the schedule. Carson, deeply embarrassed, once personally apologized to a young actress after Rooney repeatedly harassed her on air, assuring her that such behavior would never be tolerated again. Beyond the show, Rooney's personal life was equally chaotic. He married 8 times and fathered 9 children, many of whom later spoke about growing up in an atmosphere of neglect, alcohol, and abuse. His first wife, Ava Gardner, called him a handsome nightmare, recalling infidelity and violence. His son Tim admitted in interviews that the children grew up with arguments, drinking, and nights spent waiting for a father who rarely came home sober. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the diva who turned the crew into prisoners. Zsa Zsa Gabor stepped onto the Tonight Show stage looking every bit the European queen, dazzling gowns, diamonds glittering under the lights, a smile designed to enchant. To the audience, she was glamorous and playful, a larger-than-life character who joked about her many marriages. But Johnny Carson and his staff knew the price of that image. Behind the charm was a diva whose outrageous demands and temper tantrums turned every taping into a nightmare. Her list of requirements was legendary. The dressing room had to be exactly 74 degrees. There had to be orchids, never carnations, arranged just so. A bottle of Perrier had to be placed on the table with precisely 3 ice cubes. And most infuriating of all, she demanded that no female guests under 40 be booked on the same show. Carson's producers thought the list was a joke when they first received it. It wasn't. When her requests weren't met, Gabor lashed out. She once refused to leave her dressing room because the makeup department didn't have her preferred brand of foundation, forcing production assistants to race across Los Angeles to find it. On another occasion, she locked the door and shouted so loudly the crew could hear her across the hallway, threatening to ruin the entire taping unless her conditions were met. One former producer remembered Carson having to call her personally. "Zsa, honey, you look beautiful already, and we have a show to do. Let's save the cosmetics emergency for another day." Her behavior wasn't limited to petty vanity. Former house staff recalled violent outbursts at home, with ashtrays and glassware thrown in anger. Even her marriages were described as transactions, 9 in total, each one ending with luxury cars, villas, or cash settlements. As one ex-husband put it, she never married for love, only for power. Shelley Winters, the powder keg who thrived on chaos. Shelley Winters was a 2-time Academy Award winner, a respected actress with decades of work behind her. On paper, she seemed like the perfect Tonight Show guest. But for Johnny Carson, her appearances were less like interviews and more like endurance tests. With Winters, there was no predictability. only chaos waiting to erupt. From the moment she sat down, Carson's shoulders would tense. She interrupted freely, veering off into long monologues that had nothing to do with the questions asked. Sometimes she launched into political tirades about corruption in Washington. Other times, she brought up personal grievances against fellow actors, exposing affairs or grudges in front of a stunned national audience. Carson, who thrived on the rhythm of playful banter, could do little more than nod and try to guide the ship back on course. With Winters, steering the conversation was like trying to control a tornado. Her volatility wasn't just verbal. She had a reputation for physical outbursts. In one infamous moment on British television, Winters threw a glass of whiskey in fellow guest Oliver Reed's face after he made a sexist comment. The Tonight Show staff never forgot this story, and whenever she was booked, they quietly removed anything on set that might be hurled in a fit of anger. Her personal life was equally scandalous, filled with affairs that shattered families and destroyed friendships. At one point, she was simultaneously involved with a married director and the young actor he was mentoring. When the scandal erupted, marriages ended, careers were threatened, and Winters laughed it off in the press, sneering, "Weak men lose their wives." Don't blame me. That lack of remorse convinced many that she thrived on the misfortune of others. Carson could respect passion but not cruelty disguised as entertainment. After one taping where Winters derailed the show with a rambling monologue about government conspiracies, he sighed to his producer, "Some people want to make audiences laugh, some want to make them cry. Shelley makes them feel humiliated." For Carson, Winters wasn't just unpredictable, she was dangerous, a star who turned pain and scandal into her own twisted stage. Johnny Carson spent 30 years smiling for the camera, but behind that smile he saw the truth about Hollywood's brightest stars. For him, cruelty, arrogance, and hypocrisy were the things he could never forgive. These legends looked perfect on stage, yet off stage they left scars that never healed. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold Hollywood truths.